Everyone, Costini here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, and in this particular video, I want to talk about the various races in the game, potentially even the legendary lords of the game, what makes some of them strong, what makes some of them weak, and some of the things you just want to know before choosing to play any single one of them at the moment in Warhammer 3. Broadly speaking, the essential or the core game design of Total War Warhammer 3 involves the following. You have limited building slots within regions that are part of a province. You can make income buildings, you can make unit recruitment buildings, you can make growth buildings for hero capacity to be able to recruit very powerful heroes in your campaign, like the Elven Court or the Archive for mages, or combination buildings like the Blessed Grove, which obviously do give you hero capacity for hand maintenance, but also allow you to recruit things like Sisters of Avalorn and White Lions of Crix. That is the essential campaign mechanic that, or province mechanics that almost every race in the game, or the majority of races in the game, have to deal with. Now, there are some races that are unique, things like the Beastmen, for instance, or the Warriors of Chaos. They do have uniqueness in terms of how they handle the province system, how they handle the region system, but by and large, the vast majority of races will be dealing with this system. Some of the best races in Total War Warhammer 3 are the races that do excel at this. One example, the one that I'm showing here, are the High Elves. The High Elves are strong for the following reasons. The High Elves are strong because they have one main income building, the Elven Artisan, that goes all the way into the Elven Fairground. So you go from Craftsman all the way to Fairground, and the Colonnade, which is a supplemental income building and also increases control. Interesting note is that for the High Elves, if you do achieve 100 control in a province, you will gain more income. So actually having a high level of control, if you're playing the High Elves, will boost your income significantly. On top of that, the vast majority of races in the game can trade, and this is one area in particular, the High Elves, as one of the better races in Total War Warhammer 3, certainly one of the best races in the game, do excel at. The way trade works is that you go to a faction, you try and sign up for a trade agreement, but you need trade resources. The way you gain money for trade is baseline, it's through trade tariffs, so basically taxes on trade, and then you have various trade resources. The reason the High Elves do excel so well in trade, and it forms a significant basis of their economy, is that they produce trade resources with their basic economic buildings. So all of these Elven Artisans into Elven Fairgrounds, so from Craftsmen to Artisans to Fairgrounds, they are generating some resource production, Elven Trinkets. That means you're trading away resource, that means you're offering your trading partners something to work with when you are trying to set up a trade agreement. Now over here, there's no to trade of the factions I have visibility with because, well, there's just some vampire coast factions that I could trade with. Don't have vision yet with more factions, but already have a decent level of trading potential. Having good trade, like you can see, I'm earning 300 or so from each of my trading agreements, so I'm earning about 1,000 from trade over here. The rest of it, I'm either earning from background income or building income. Everyone will have some level of background income, and the building income is just like the money that buildings themselves will generate. That is one of the essential things to understand. Point is, factions that do well in their terms of their province management system, that have good income, relatively low construction costs for buildings, good buildings that can get access to units for buildings relatively quickly, and heroes are some of the strongest ones. High Elves do have some issues in this respect because they generally require tier 4 in order to increase their hero capacity, so they're kind of behind some of the races like Dark Elves, Greenskins, Skaven. But they are a fairly strong race, though they are a race that may not start as strong as some other races or may not have that initial strength boost as some other races, but eventually they will get there in a campaign. Then there's the question of climate. One of the things that will make or break your campaign will be the climate suitability. So you go from suitable to unpleasant to uninhabitable. essentially what this means really is that you always almost want to have suitable climate in your campaign. You can deal with some unpleasant, but if you're constantly expanding into unpleasant climate, it will slow down your campaign progress significantly because you're going to be paying more, you'll gain less money from that, you'll have some control issues, not too many, but essentially you'll just be weaker. And then uninhabitable, it will create a lot of issues. So for instance, Tyrion over here, he doesn't necessarily have a huge amount of suitable climate in his campaign. Though, just the types of climate that you may have suitable in campaign or not are not necessarily the make or break thing, actually. It depends which types of climate are suitable. So for instance, you might think, oh, Tyrion doesn't necessarily have a lot of climate types. It doesn't matter, because Tyrion is surrounded by a lot of territory in his campaign that is very, very suitable for him to expand in. He just has to take it from the spiky elves. So that's one of the reasons his campaign actually ends up quite well. A counterexample of a campaign that does have an issue, Grom the Paunch, because he's surrounded constantly by unpleasant climate. And while for him Ulthuan is suitable climate, the only other climate in the game that would be suitable for Grom would be all the way right here in the Badlands, which is a problem for Grom. So that does limit his campaign potential. Climate suitability is very important. The kind of units you can recruit early on in campaign are important. What strength is your basic army going to have? What strength is your endgame army going to have? The High Elves, for instance, have a really strong basic army of spearmen and archers with light armor specifically, though you can recruit obviously archers with no armor. I personally prefer going with light armor just because, well, they will have more survivability because that's what armor is doing. It reduces damage and they're only slightly more expensive. Though from any settlement you might recruit archers and spearmen, you will need a barracks, tier 1 barracks for archers with light armor. Bear that particular aspect in mind. So the kind of units, the kind of heroes that you do have access to are going to be important. The kind of awards that you will have access to in a campaign, that is also going to be essential for your campaign success. This is where certainly the High Elves can have an issue, some other races don't necessarily do. But still, the High Elves do have a great hero selection. It's just, well, there's all the negative traits they have that have to relate to influence. Almost every race has some unique campaign resource that they have to deal with. In the case of the High Elves, it's the question of influence. Influence will allow you to recruit certain lords and heroes that have positive traits. If you're recruiting the ones without influence, you're going to get negative traits, so they're going to have some issues. Some of these don't necessarily matter all that much, but some absolutely do. Like, if I want to give an advice to anyone that's playing the High Elves, is like the one trait that doesn't matter at all, and it's kind of like as close to neutral as possible, is Ridicule. It just increases the recruitment duration for Phoenix units, which is not something you really give a crap about anyway. Just bear that particular aspect in mind. Okay, beyond provinces, management, lords, heroes. Okay, heroes are going to matter, but the kind of heroes are going to matter. Having a race or a faction that has access to a hero with good casualty replenishment is important, because casualty replenishment is how you keep your armies at full strength throughout the course of your campaign, even when you might take significant amounts of damage. That is what can make or break some races. On top of that, however, we also have to consider the diplomacy angle. Who are your enemies? How do other factions feel towards you? Do they hate you? Do they like you? For instance, one of the things about the High Elves is that many races in the game, that very few races in the game absolutely despise them, and generally disorder races. The major exception to this are the Dark Elves, who have a minus 100 aversion, but everything else, the vast majority of other races in the game, they can get along with one way or another in their campaign. Because if it's like with minus 40 aversion, you can handle that. You can have really great relationships with a faction in a campaign. Well, minus 100, it kind of becomes too much of a problem. That's not to say that aversion dictates everything. The territory you control, does the AI want that territory? What are your relationships with them? Like, for instance, over here, I started with a war with Calador because they dislike me for, well, let's just say historical relations, for instance. Yeah, Calador and Tyrion do not get along very well. So that is quite important. Another factor to talk about is the situation of auto-resolve and relative army strength. Now, when we talk about the auto-resolve, what matters with auto-resolve? Well, typically it's supposed to be your army strength, so things like lords, lord ranks, unit ranks, hero ranks, all that. But really, the main overriding factor is going to be the armor of your units. You have an army with a high level of armor going up against an army that doesn't, you're going to curb stomp them. But you will certainly take damage in the process. Now, I'm certainly using a mod for the sake of this that makes things more even. What you need to know is that the auto-resolve doesn't work particularly well in Warhammer 3. The reason it doesn't work particularly well is it highly values armor, but on top of that, every single settlement, minor, major settlement, doesn't matter, has an auto-resolve benefit associated with it. There is a mod that removes that. That's what I'm using over here. So you can have a more neutral baseline on that subject. On top of that, there's a modifier to the auto-resolve based on the battle difficulty you're playing on in a campaign. Now, here's the reason why I strongly argue that you should play something like very hard, because it's not just going to affect the auto-resolve or the tactics the AI is going to use, it's also going to affect the AI aggression. Like, for instance, Calidor going over here and being less aggressive is something they wouldn't be doing on a lower difficulty. Just gonna point that out. In particular in campaign, or Alariel marching over here and even almost coming close to taking the Shrine of Cain, something that would not happen on a lower difficulty. So difficulty matters, auto-resolve matters because your army will take more or less damage dependent on it, though you can certainly make things more even by using certain mods to remove the penalty, so penalties that you have, or make things more fair. It isn't a perfect system that you do have, and I really wish Creative Assembly would improve the auto-resolve with respect to Warhammer 3, but until they do, this is what we got to work with, unfortunately. That's the sad state of affairs of the game at the moment. Not perfect, though it's certainly, in some ways it's a better system than before. The problem is just that constant settlement situation. Like, basically, if you're playing the vanilla game, my advice to anyone is get used to the idea of playing battles manually, because the casualties are taking for auto-resolve, even on normal difficulty, even if you're purely playing on normal, the casualties you're taking for auto-resolve, and I'm sure many people are making this mistake, you might think, oh, I'll win a battle and the casualties aren't too bad. Here's the reality. You would take fewer casualties, get more experience, get better results overall if you fought battles manually. And yes, that does matter, because if you can go for a battle and let's say you lose less than 100 men, well, guess what? You can go to up to the next battle and the next battle and the next battle. You can minimize your casualties so much. I don't like to do that because I hate fighting all these constant mindless grindy battles, but there are mods, of course. But if you want to play vanilla, that's something you want to keep in mind. One of the things that does matter when we're talking about the differences between races is some races are significantly better than others. The High Elves are kind of in the middle ground of this. They don't have the worst auto-resolve, they don't have the best, but they do have one glaring issue. If you're playing High Elves, this is the kind of army you want to use for much of your early game. A couple of spearmen to protect your flanks from some front line, a bunch of archers in like a checkerboard formation, grid formation, whatever. A bunch of archers. The problem with this kind of formation in an auto-resolve is that your spearmen, who you probably don't care about too much, but your spearmen will take the brunt of the damage. Now, you can build spearmen in any particular settlement, and you don't necessarily care about the ranks of them. They're meant to hold the line. They're not meant to kill the enemy, but it's just something that ends up being annoying. Yeah, the auto-resolve doesn't handle balanced armies like this very well. It does tend to inflict more severe damage on your melee units as opposed to your ranged units. This is why a pure melee army or a pure ranged army does tend to work better with respect to the auto-resolve. This is why the Warriors of Chaos, which are a melee-dominant faction, do so well in auto-resolve. It's not because the Warriors of Chaos necessarily have the best units in the game for auto-resolve, though they do have that as well, but rather because the Warriors of Chaos, being a melee-centric faction, tend to build, like, because they're a melee-only faction, actually, with very limited, extremely limited range units, mainly are some artillery and some ranged skirmisher cavalry. Warriors Chaos armies tend to be almost exclusively made up of melee units. And guess what? That benefits them in auto-resolve. So that's one of the things to know when you're dealing with the subject matter of Warhammer 3 and the various races. the way you play a campaign, the essentials of playing a campaign is like, okay, what is my initial goal? How do I accomplish that goal in as quick of a fashion as possible? What's my long-term goal, and how I accomplish that as quickly as possible? My long-term goal over here, or my medium-term goal, rather, early goal for Tyrion in this case, using that as an example, obviously take my initial province. Medium-term goal, after doing that, is wipe out Safari, help Elfarion to some extent, so I can trade away territory to him, deal with Calador, deal with Nakari, unify Ulfon, and then go after Morathi, go into Malekith. That's the long-term goal. That's the campaign plan, basically. That's all I need to worry about in the campaign. So, once this end turn is finished, I will go over what I did exactly in this campaign and how I achieved victory. And again, like, if you're playing vanilla, strongly recommend you play these battles manually because you can achieve these results faster. And better. Okay, so I started with Tyrion over here by Lothern. I took the Tower of Lycia in turn 1. I also recruited a second army by Lothern, and I force marched Tyrion. Second turn, I took the army from Lothern, attacked this port over here, force marched Tyrion to help out. Third turn, took the Shrine of Assyrian, with just Tyrion, moved my army over here to the south, started recruiting some archers, moved in southern Evres, took some territory in southern Evres, particularly Cairn Fair and Shrine of Leok, fought some greenskins, traded away the territory to Elfarion. Meanwhile, built forces to invade Safari, invaded Safari with just Tyrion, took them out, moved my army over here from southern Evres over here to west, built them up to a full stack, and now I am invading Calador. Long-term campaign plan, unify the coast with my secondary army over here, which I absolutely can do and will be doing. And then, once that is sorted out, then one of the things you can certainly take advantage of is like just setting up an ambush, so to lure the enemy and give them a false sense of security, a really false sense of security. Then over here with Tyrion, I do aim to march as quickly as I can against Nakari, deal with Nakari, deal with the Shrine of Cain, take the Shrine of Cain, maybe give that to Alariel to unify it. Long-term campaign goal, unify both my armies, go deal with Morathi, deal with Astankia, deal with the Sisters of Twilight. They make poor allies, so wipe them out. Then take all of this territory, make a deal with Alif and Ar, and eventually invade Malekith and to obliterate everyone. This is a good campaign plan. And it's this particular dynamic that I want people to understand that makes Tyrion one of the strongest legendary lords. It's not that his starting position is so incredibly safe. It's the fact that his campaign dynamic is designed in such a way that, oh, you're just conquering territory constantly. You have a great path in expansion. You can maintain multiple armies from relatively early on in a campaign. You have a lot of resources. You have the capability of waging a multi-front war against the factions that are opposed to you. This is what makes a great campaign in Warhammer 3. What makes for a poor campaign is where you're constantly bashing your head against a brick wall, trying to overcome even the most basic challenge that you have. This is the reason someone like Kugaf is a pile of crap. This is the reason someone like Rhesus is a pile of crap. This is the reason X, Y, and Z campaigns are bad. Simple as that. It's all about achieving as much as possible within the shortest possible time frame of a campaign. Also should be pointed out when you're taking settlements that the amount of post-battle loot, so that every battle you fight, you'll gain some money. But on top of that, you also have some post-battle options, like sacking settlement, occupying settlement, various options with regards to captives that you can use. One of the things that makes the High Elves pretty decent is that not only do they generate a decent amount of income in battles, but they also are in this kind of situation where their post-battle options are fairly decent. They get influence, things like influence, they can replenish, they can get a decent level of money from post-battle. Or experience if you're interested in doing so. And that makes for a great campaign. Whereas races that have a poor income in their settlements or have poor post-battle loot, or more often than not, both of them. You want to understand one of the issues of the dwarves? Dwarves have good a decent income, though it's not as good as some others, but they have really terrible post-battle loot. That's one of the problems in their particular case. Or you look at Kugav. Kugav can get a lot of post-battle loot options, but his basic income is so terrible, and his construction costs are really high. That is the make or break thing about certain races, certain campaigns in Warhammer 3. And that's all I had to say, just going over these kind of things. Hope it helped you out. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. And if you do enjoy my content, consider checking out my PayPal or Patreon, and stay tuned for more.